can you give me a quick refresher on the history of the Acadians?
Hey, I can do that.
All right. Tell me what year you're gonna start, approximately.
1602 in France.
1602. Okay.
Okay. 1602 is the approximate year that Michel Boudreau, the male name Michel, was born around 1602. In about 1636, he married a Michel Aucoin. They were married in France. The importance of these two people is this. They were some of the first French people to come to the New World, which was where Nova Scotia is now. Michel Boudreau's name was spelled B-O-U-D-R-O-T. Boudreau today is spelled B-O-U-D-R-E-A-U, or with an X, as ours is. Let me go through, let me start with Michel Boudreau and his wife, Michel Aucoin. They were selected as some of the first, in the first group that was to settle in the New World. During that time, France and England, this was in the mid 1600s, England and France in Europe were constantly at war with each other, okay? When America was discovered, every major country that had any kind of value in Europe wanted a place in the New World, you know, because they saw this as a way to expand their particular way of life. The Spanish, the English, and the French. There were Portuguese also, but Spanish, English, and French were the major groups that influenced the settlement of this country initially. France sent their first settlers to where Nova Scotia is now. These first settlers called this piece of property, or this piece of land where they settled, Acadie, the French name for Acadia. Hence, the Acadians. They were the first people to be referred to as Acadians, because the place was called Acadiana, or Acadian, Acadia. There was also a French group that settled, the French people settled in the northern part of that area, which is now Canada, the Canadian area. There were a lot of French people there that settled.
So it was from France to Nova Scotia.
Correct.
In that area.
Right. Nova Scotia was referred to as Acadia then, and north of Acadia is the Canadian world, so to speak. Some of the French people settled in the the eastern part of Canada, in that area. During that time, the inhabitants of that area were Native Americans, Mi'kmaq Indian. I was gonna talk about the Native Americans that lived here at the time when the French first migrated to Acadia and to Canada. The Mi'kmaq Indians, which are it's a small group of American Indians that existed at that time. People are probably more familiar with the Iroquois group of Indians. The Iroquois were a larger group that were, that we see on TV a lot in movies. they were of that group of people.
And what area were they in?
The
Northern?
northeastern United States
Okay.
at that time.
And Canada?
Correct. And
Okay.
Canada. The Iroquois gradually moved further down south and to the west.
Mm-hmm.
The Mi'kmaq didn't. Mi'kmaq Indians stayed up there. As a matter of fact, there still are some Mi'kmaq Indians up there, although they're a very small group. So the Mi'kmaqs, the French people were treated very well by the Native American Indians there, and they actually helped them survive when they first arrived there, because the the land and the format of the land there was quite different than in Europe, so they had a more difficult time to survive. They didn't have the foods that they were accustomed to. They weren't sure what to eat and how to survive in the winter, and the Indians helped them. Now, at that same time, remember, France and England were at war, right? France sent some people to establish themselves in the New World as French territory. That's where Michel Boudreau comes in. However, the English did the same thing.
Around that time, where they were coming from England.
Correct.
Michel
During
Boudreau
the mid
is still there.
1600s, yeah, during the mid 1600s, there was some English coming there, and some of the English also settled in Canada.
So is there some event or something that happened to cause those groups to move to the southern United States?
Uh,
Into
Ask me that.
Louisiana?
okay, ask me that question again. Louisiana. Okay, Louisiana. Spain. Remember, Spain was also one of the major characters in moving to the New World. Spain sent settlers in around Florida, into Florida, along the Gulf Coast, where Mississippi is now, and Louisiana, some in Texas as well.
What caused Michel Boudreau and his group to move from, or that group to move from Canada down to Louisiana?
Okay, Michel Boudreau had died before that actually happened.
Okay.
Okay, this happened. The Acadians were constantly bickering with the English colonies in, across the Bay of Fundy. The Bay of Fundy separated Acadia and what we know as the eastern coast of the United States, and it still does, of course, right now. And this bickering started sometime around 1713, approximately, where the English colonies were constantly kind of at odds with the French colonies in Acadia, and they'd bicker at each other and constantly. France and England was still constantly at war in Europe. In Europe, of course, the French did not want to pledge allegiance to the King of England, and neither did the English want to pledge allegiance to the King of France, King of France. One of the most important things to remember about the French Acadians was that they were Catholic. The English were Protestant at that time. The English defeated France. France deeded Acadia to the English. It told England that they could have Acadia. Of course, they didn't ask the Acadians whether they wanted to become French subjects, English subjects. And the Acadians did not want to become English subjects, regardless of whether France gave them to England or not, And in 1755, things came to a head. The English colonies had established themselves as a pretty strong military existence in the eastern United States at the time. And this was, if you recall, this was still before the United States or America was officially established. You know,
Right.
in 1776 was when the English colony in the New World separated themselves from England. They did not want to be ruled by a king and queen any longer. They wanted their own government, which they established at that time. But in 1755, the English colonies did not want a French colony across from them, especially a French colony that had been deeded to them by France itself, you know. So they gave the French a certain amount of time to consider their situation. They had to either pledge allegiance to the King and Queen of England, or they were going to be kicked out of Nova Scotia, or Acadia at the time, as it was referred to. The name Nova Scotia actually means New Scotland.
Yes,
And that name came into existence after the Acadians were booted out of Acadia. At that time, around 1755, was kind of like an all-out war between the English colonies and the Acadians, the French. Some of them were families were separated, women and children from the men. The men were some of them were sent to prisoner of war camps, and I did find record that our direct ancestor, whose name was Alexander Boudreau, who was the grandson of Michel Boudreau, was captured and brought to Bristol, England in 1756. 1755, 1756, during that big insurgent, you know, of the English colonies.
Was that around the time
Bristol,
when they moved?
Bristol, England was at that time known as a prisoner of war camp. And I did find record of the ship he was sent to, and his wife and child, Jean-Baptiste Boudreau, were sent to England also. They weren't put in a prisoner of war camp, but he was. He died the next year. I don't know of what. He possibly had been wounded, or possibly being in the prisoner of war camp. I don't know, maybe he tried to escape, or maybe he wasn't fed right, or maybe he wasn't treated right. But the next year he died. His wife and his child, Jean-Baptiste Boudreau, who is, without him, we wouldn't exist today as we do, the Boudreaux.
The Boudreaux.
Right. There are other Boudreaux, but this is our line.
Is he the one that came to Louisiana?
Correct. Okay, during that time, now remember, this was 1755, and our direct descendant, the Boudreau direct descendant, with his mother, moved to a southern part of France during that time, between 1755 and 1785, about 30 years. And of course, Jean-Baptiste Boudreau was probably around 38 then, something like that. He was 7 or 8 years old when the insurgent began in Acadia in 1755. There were other Acadians who were sent to southern France, or who chose to go to southern France and settle there after they were kicked out of Acadia. Okay, some Acadians came to Louisiana. Some of them came by boat around the eastern and southern coast of the United States into Louisiana. and some of them came cross country. Boussole Broussard was a major character in what's referred to as the Underground Railroad to bring Acadians, French Acadians, to Louisiana at the time. Because remember, the U.S. was kind of controlled or managed, or was not managed, but was being possessed by the English at that time, you know. So some of our relatives, you know, some Boudreaux, some Gautreaux, some other relatives, Rivets, etc., came directly from Acadia, either by boat around the eastern and southern coast of the United States, or by cross country into Louisiana. Why Louisiana? Because Louisiana was then owned or was claimed by Spain. Spain, the Spanish were Catholic. Catholicism was very important to the Acadians, and they knew that to settle in Louisiana, they would be with other Catholics, you know. Plus, the Spanish people wanted hardworking farmers, people who knew how to farm, etc. The Acadians fit the bill. So they settled in Louisiana at the time. There were some French people that had migrated to Louisiana. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to, remember, the Acadians had also been separated. There were families that were broken up. Mm-hmm. Some families, part of the family was in France, some part of the family was in Louisiana, you know. Mm. So at that time, Jean-Baptiste Boudreaux sailed on a ship with his mother, who was a Vincent. Her maiden name was Vincent. And they arrived in Louisiana. And
about what year?
That was in 1785, approximately.
1785.
Right.
All right, Dad.
And they settled along the coast of Bayou Lafourche.
All right, Dad. Thanks a lot for dropping some Cajun knowledge on us. A story I've heard many times. We appreciate it. We'll pick it up maybe at this point another time.
All right. You're very welcome. The migration of the Acadians from Bayou Lafourche area to Orneville, Leonville, Lafayette, etc.
Excellent. Perfect.